Welcome, everybody, to the Verts podcast. I'm your host, as always, Sonny Weaver. Joining me today are the guys from the CC podcast, Commissioner Corner, Bomber and Lip. How are you guys doing today?
Hey, I told you before we started this, don't ask me how I'm doing, Sonny. I said I was doing fine.
I'm always going to ask you. You can't just jump right into it.
April 15th, Saturday, doing pretty good. You know, it's a Saturday. It's always good on a Saturday. I can't speak for Lip, but I would assume probably the same for him.
Oh, yeah. Doing good. Excited.
Lip sounds excited. So we've talked about doing this for a little while, a little bit of a panel setup. We're going into Madden 18. We're kind of in that period in between. Obviously, NBL still rolling strong August to August, but this is the time of year when people start getting excited for the next edition of Madden. And so what we wanted to do was we kind of wanted to put together a multi-part series where we go through different facets of the game and talk about some things we'd like to see, comment on where Madden 17 took us, the positives, the negatives, and what Madden 18 could possibly hold for us. So here on the first episode, and this will kind of be divided up in two episodes of itself, and we're going to get into the connected franchise mode. Obviously, with our experience through NBL and just generally playing a lot of Madden, I think we offer something here. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide up into two parts. The first part being what we call kind of the regular season, the every week, every day type stuff that you go through when you're part of connected franchise mode. So Bomber, I want to start off with you. When you look at connected franchise mode, especially heading into Madden 18, what's something that you have to really feel like the game's taking the next step in the progression?
There's a lot of things that when I look at the CFM mode that I think we can improve on. I think they did good with, before you play, the game planning stuff. I thought that stuff was cool. The practice, the traits of when you're going to play somebody, it tells you, what their tendencies are. Even though I think there's a little bit of a bug in that, and that kind of needs to be, cleaned up a little bit as far as the formula that they're using to determine how someone their tendencies are. But a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. I mean, I think we could talk about this first. I think everybody had an issue with regression because we play stock sliders on everything. That's the way that that NBL rolls. So regression was kind of a robotic thing. You hit 28 years old on offense as a wide receiver or halfback, and you tended to lose no matter what your production value was throughout the year. And me and Lip personally experienced that with two wide receivers that were at the top of the class in the NBL, just regressed because they hit the age of 28. So that was kind of a negative as far as, in my mind, as far as the regression. I understand that they wanted to boost up, younger players and make younger players, have value so that you want to put them on the field, right? And I think that's kind of what they were kind of toying with there. Like, how do we make younger people get put on the field and not just get all their development through XP and not actually play? So I think this really made you have to throw those guys into the fire to get that XP because it was cheaper at the time and you could really develop people. I love that part, but I think the regression needs to be changed. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I think that it seems very strange to have a 28-year-old wide receiver hit that 1,500-yard mark, 15 touchdowns, and then regress at the same time. I think that we've seen a couple things, not just this Madden, but a couple of the past Maddens where maybe there's something with their goals that is having a play into this, because if you look at wide receivers, their top goal, I think, is somewhere around 90 to 100 receptions.
120 sometimes, I've seen.
I understand that for a season-long 15-minute quarters, but most CFMs aren't playing the 15-minute quarters, so maybe there would be some kind of way to gauge it down so that if you're playing 6-minute quarters, you have a realistic target of maybe 60 catches, and then go off of it from there, so that you're not having that extreme difference just because you're playing different quarter lengths. The other thing is just 28 does seem a little bit early, maybe 30, 31, something like that for regression to begin. I think would help keep some of the studs around a lot longer.
And you bring up a couple good points there that I'm going to hit on. Linear regression is a problem. The idea that everybody regresses the same way at a certain point is not realistic. You've got Darren Sproles and Tom Brady and some of these guys. Andrew Whitworth just had the biggest offensive lineman contract of the offseason. The biggest left tackle contract of the offseason. The guy's like 37 or 38, still playing at a Pro Bowl caliber. That just can't happen in Madden. So to what the fix there is. I'm not sure. Maybe it's kind of a mixture of what they used to do, being more of that random dice roll. Guys kind of fall off a cliff. But I think production has to be factored in there somewhat, because if you're still putting up big numbers, odds are you're still, athletically and skill-wise developed enough to do that the next year you wouldn't just completely fall off a cliff. And that's something that needs to be looked at. Something else you mentioned in there, Lip, and we'll kind of talk about this a little bit here. Adjusting things to the kind of the settings of the league. I think you bring up a good point when you talk about player goals have always been kind of preset, and however long your quarters are, it doesn't matter. We run 6-minute quarters, no Excel clock. Our stats, we feel like, get pretty realistic, pretty close to real NFL stats. Now, some guys running 15-minute quarters may feel the same way, and that's fine. But we've got to come up with a better system to make those goals match. There's a lot of defensive goals, especially picks in a season, things like that just aren't obtainable. And I think that's impacting some of the development of these guys. That has really thrown off, I think, what the developers were looking for when they thought about that regression system.
Yeah, and what about a season goal is, something I just thought of right now. What about not having the season goal set, before the season starts, but something that says, if you finish in the top 5% of, the league in interceptions, you get it. If you do a percentage based upon that at the top, you kind of eliminate having those preset hard goals that might not apply to someone playing shorter quarters.
That's probably a good way to do it. It's probably the easiest,
especially in a 32-man league.
Yeah, I mean, from a developer standpoint, if you do it that way, really all you're saying is you're looking at results, and that's probably a better idea than trying to guess statistics for these leagues.
I think that another thing that might help is maybe you could look at different position groups and say, your quarterbacks are going to play longer. Your wide receivers are going to fall off sooner. So instead of having everybody start to drop down at that 28, 29, 30 range, maybe for each position group, you implemented something that made your slower guys regress a year sooner, your normal guys regress at, say, 30, and then your superstars make it to like 31 or 32.
So you make the development trait actually mean a little bit more as far as in the regression stage. Yeah, because having a star, like let's say when you started, having been Roethlisberger as a superstar means absolutely nothing, because you're going to get more XP, but he's already at the point where he's so past his prime as far as age that you're not really going to be able to develop him, so it means nothing. And I found the same way with Stafford. The minute he got up to a superstar development, he was already at that age of 30, 31, where he's not getting any XP. I'm just trying to tread water and help fight against regression, even though he's finishing in the top 2% of yards, touchdowns in the league. So that's a great point, actually.
Yeah, I think for those guys, like Matt Stafford's probably a good example. 31 years old to start losing. I think, what's he down to now, throw power wise? Like
94. So he dropped 4 points. So in 2 seasons, and he's 32 right now.
I think that if he is a superstar, maybe you put that at an older age that quarterbacks actually do start to drop off. But I just think that for quarterbacks, 32 is a little too young. And if they are superstar mode, like you said, give it a little more value, have that hold off their regression for maybe a year or two, because they are a superstar.
And there's a good segue there, I think, to another topic that we had kind of talked about heading into this.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned your position groups and regressions by position groups. Maybe that's a way to help introduce positional coaches. Maybe various positional coaches, your quarterback coach, your running back coach can help have an impact on the way those guys regress, but also coachings in general, whether that's an offensive or defensive coordinator, help kind of create some sort of like a unity. Bomber, you've mentioned it, kind of called it the Legion of Boom effect, where you kind of get these effects based on the quality of the players and their skills around them.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if you wanted to segue into schemes already, but I had that kind of tied in. If your offensive line is gelling with your quarterback, when y'all have played together a while, everybody starts to gel, and it creates chemistry within. And I know they have this in MUT somewhat. Creates chemistry within certain groups that play together. Quarterback to wide receiver, offensive line quarterback, halfback, offensive line kind of thing. You got defensive line, linebacker core, and you can create these types of chemistry that help modify it could help modify regression, but also help improve and give you boosts as your team gels together. Because honestly, football and the NFL is just a true team sport in the end of the day. So playing more as a team, makes guys who are at a certain level individually play above their level because they're all playing as one unit. So I think that needs to be rewarded more, especially in CFM, which is a connected franchise mode. So year to year, your guys are gelling more and becoming more as one and more as a unit than just as individuals.
I think that you see in the NFL sometimes that coordinators and even position coaches have a huge impact on players. Sometimes if, especially on offense, if a quarterback isn't really seeing eye to eye with an offensive coordinator, that can cause some huge problems. And sometimes it doesn't even have a whole lot to do with the head coach. It is all a big misstep in communication between the coordinator and the quarterback and other positions that just don't make things gel right. So if you had some kind of system that could give you coordinators for each side of the ball or position coaches that would help those guys, fit
in their scheme, and that's the scheme thing. Yeah.
And that would give you that gel, that Legion of Boom kind of thing that you're talking about, that would really help or hurt your play, and you'd have to factor that into your coaching and your management in CFM.
And Sonny, let's look at schemes right now in Madden 17. If we want to tie everything in, schemes, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, what do we have right now? We have the schemes, just it seems loosely tied to what's really production, or it's loosely tied to being effective. It really doesn't matter. I can bring anybody in at any position and put them in any scheme, and it's not really a big deal.
Right, and we'll talk about that in that next episode more when we talk about the offseason, because I think what happens is if we value the scheme and we add bonuses for the right guys, when you get into the offseason, it's going to create more interest in going for guys not necessarily the highest rated, but the one that actually fits your scheme. And so we'll get there, but one more thing I want to segue into here in this episode. We've talked a lot about, what you can do schematic-wise and different things, progression, regression. How do you guys feel about injuries? One thing that we've always had an issue with in Madden is the offensive linemen do not get hurt. And what that does is that creates a lack of need to then have backup offensive linemen really develop. Now, I know, Lip, you took a season and you actually were developing them through the practice squad, and I think the practice squad was a great addition this year. But the lack of offensive lineman injuries, I think that's really a game changer in roster management and generally just the way the game gets played.
Yeah, I can tell you firsthand that I absolutely love the injuries that were brought into Madden 17. I was actually crushed by injuries this year, and I love it because I really have to dig deep, find guys who can contribute whenever my stars go down, whenever there's a hole to fill. And I think that adds a huge missing piece to the game that we have not had. I don't know if we've ever had it, but I love the injuries. The only thing that needs to go in with this is what you said with the linemen. You never see linemen get injured. It's so rare. You basically never see it, and that makes guys only have to carry 5 linemen, which isn't realistic. And if you watch NFL, you see linemen go down all the time. Terrible troubles with their knees a lot. So having guys that you can bring in that spot whenever a guy goes down adds to the realistic feel of the game, and that is something that absolutely needs to happen because carrying just 5 linemen is not it's just not realistic.
Yeah, and on my team, offensive line, as far as in real life with the Lions, that's probably the most injured position on that team. You see offensive lineman injury a lot. I think, Sonny, you brought up an idea to John about potentially bringing in something along the practice squad if you couldn't get it in the code. Bringing in different levels of practice. Did you want to explain something like that?
Yeah, so something I had talked to John White about that he seemed pretty receptive of is adding an element of injury to practice. And I know some people will freak out, but bear with me here. So basically consider practice 3 levels. You've got your full contact practice, like in the NFL, they get a limited amount of those a year. Full contact, full tackling. In those practices, you would get the most XP. However, you'd have the highest risk of injury. Then you would have kind of that middle tier, and we'd call that just a normal practice. And that would be a average amount of XP with a very slight chance of injury. And then the last one would be what's called a walkthrough. And a walkthrough would give just a little bit of XP, but then it would have no chance of injury. And so through those three different things, you would almost modify the type of practice you were doing each week. So if you wanted to do let's say a blitz counter practice, like our current practices are, but you want to run it as a full contact practice, you have a high risk of injury, but you're going to get a modifier in extra XP. I think the nice thing about that is because that is kind of a random generation there, you're gonna find out about injuries post practice. You can add linemen to that, and that can be the way that we start creeping injuries into the game for the linemen.
Yeah,
and injuries happen. That's a really good idea because that's a lot. That's how it goes sometimes. In practices, you have walkthroughs where you have nothing on but a helmet, and you're literally just walking through the plays. You're not gaining a whole lot of experience. You're just mentally going over the reps, but you're not putting your body at risk. Other times you go full pads, but you don't wear the lower stuff, so you're still not hitting below the waist, but you're still getting some contact, still risk some injury, a little more than the mental reps, but you are going through it. And then there is, of course, the full pads, full contact, risk an injury, gaining mental XP and physical XP in real life. So that would be a really good way, a very realistic way to implement that into Madden. And another thing with injuries is I think that it would be really cool to have some type of injury history. Whenever you go in and look at somebody's player card, you can see when they were drafted. You can see different awards they won. I would like to see an injury history on a guy, because if I'm going out in free agency and I'm looking for a guy, I don't want a guy that has a history of injury. Right now, the best thing that you could do is maybe get some information from an outside owner, but that's probably not going to give you the information that you want. So if there was a detailed history, so they broke their collarbone and were out for 5 weeks at this point, I think that would add a whole new level of, do I really want to pay this guy this much money whenever he has such a risk of being injured for a long period of time?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Lip. And I just wanted to add one more thing as far as that history goes. There's another thing that I wish they would add, and this kind of a little bit off topic, but before we close out this segment, you're going to have injury history on the history page. That would be, outstanding, because T.Y. Hilton got hurt every year this year, and he still went along and got a big contract with the Jets that they weren't 100% aware that it was every year. They know he had been hurt a little bit. They didn't know what the injuries were. That would be great. But I also think they need to add which team selected this person in the draft. You just see where they were drafted by. So you got like a third-round pick that's been moved along. Then he finally finds a home, and no one can remember who actually drafted him in the third round. I think that would be another thing they could just add on there as far as in the history page or at the top of their thing, who they were drafted by.
Yeah, and history is big. It's best to know where you came from to know where you're going. I think those are both great suggestions going forward. I think that about wraps up episode 1 here for Connected Franchise Mode. Now, episode 2 we'll get into here in another episode. But episode 2, you can look forward to hearing about what's going on in the offseason. I think we got a lot of good stuff there. So make sure you tune back in next time for episode number 2.